The autumn wind carried the scent of damp leaves through the corridors of the Haeundae Public High School in Busan. The bell had just rung, and the last group of students reluctantly shuffled into the classroom for their afternoon literature lesson. At the front of the room stood Seong-min, a man in his early 40s with a calm demeanor and a reputation for inspiring both admiration and fear among his students. With neatly combed hair, horn-rimmed glasses, and a voice that balanced authority and softness, he had become one of the most respected educators in the district. He believed in literature's power, not just to teach grammar or composition, but to awaken empathy in young minds. His class was a mix of the typical and the extraordinary, rowdy boys in the back, overachievers in the front, and a few silent figures lost somewhere in between. Among them, always seated at the very last row, by the window, was Jiwoo. She was the kind of student who barely made noise but always submitted work that left Seong-min pausing in wonder. Her essays carried a maturity and subtlety that stood out starkly against the adolescent tone of her peers. Yet, there was a barrier around her, an invisible wall that kept classmates at bay and made teachers tread carefully. She never raised her hand, never joined group activities voluntarily, and during lunch breaks she vanished without a trace. He had noticed she never once entered the school cafeteria. Today's class was on the existential themes in Camus' The Stranger. As Seong-min spoke, his eyes occasionally drifted to Jiwoo. She was, as always, focused, pen moving with intent. When the bell finally rang again, the students began to gather their belongings with the usual haste. Seong-min was already erasing the whiteboard when he heard the faint scrape of a chair. Jiwoo hadn't left. She approached the front slowly, her eyes fixed on the floor. She was small for her age, with hair too long to be school regulation, and sleeves that seemed to swallow her hands. When she finally stood before him, she didn't speak. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of lined notebook paper. She held it out to him with both hands. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper, barely above silence. "Please don't read it out loud." Then, before he could reply, she turned and walked out of the room. Seong-min stood still, the paper in his hand now heavier than any textbook. He looked toward the door, half expecting her to come back to say it was a mistake, a joke, a test, but she didn't. The hallway was already echoing with voices and footsteps, and Jiwoo had disappeared into them. He sat at his desk and held the note between his fingers for a long time. The edges were worn, like it had been folded and unfolded, many times. There was no name on it, no decoration, no attempt at disguise, just the note and those 6 words that now pulsed in his memory. "Please don't read it out loud." He debated waiting until later, maybe in the privacy of his apartment or at least in the silence of the faculty lounge, but something inside him, an urgency he couldn't explain, compelled him to unfold the note then and there. The moment his eyes scanned the words, something shifted. His posture straightened, his face drained of color. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. What he read made his heart race with a mixture of disbelief, fear, and profound sadness. He folded the paper again with deliberate care and slipped it into the breast pocket of his blazer. For a long while, he simply sat there, staring at the grain of the wooden desk, as if the entire weight of Jiwoo's world had just been placed upon his shoulders. The corridors were now empty, and the sunlight had started to dip behind the school building, casting long shadows across the floor. The moment passed, but the echo of the words remained. He didn't go to the teacher's lounge that afternoon. He didn't attend the weekly staff meeting. Instead, he walked the long way home, trying to piece together what he had just learned and what it meant. That night, sleep didn't come easily. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Jiwoo's face appearing each time he closed his eyes. The note was in the drawer of his desk now, but its presence lingered heavy and unrelenting. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not even his older sister, who occasionally called to check in on him. He knew instinctively that this was not something to be shared without care. The next morning, the classroom atmosphere had subtly changed. Seong-min entered with the same composed gait, but his gaze was sharper, more attentive. During roll call, his eyes lingered a little longer on Jiwoo's name. She was present, seated in the same spot, her head slightly bowed. He didn't mention the note, didn't acknowledge her differently. But when she looked up briefly and met his eyes, something passed between them. An understanding, a shared silence. The lesson that day was on poetry, specifically, the silent grief that runs through the verses of modern Korean poets. Seongmin's voice faltered only once, when reading a stanza about invisible burdens. A few students noticed, whispered among themselves. Others glanced at Jiwoo, whose face remained expressionless. Seongmin regained his composure quickly, but the murmur had begun. In the teacher's lounge later that day, someone asked if he was feeling well. He nodded, brushed it off with a smile. But inside he knew something had begun. A shift, subtle but irreversible. And all it had taken was a folded note and a whisper. That morning, the hum of routine returned to Haeundae Public High School, but for Seongmin everything had changed. The students filed into his classroom, their usual chatter filling the air, yet his mind was still tethered to the words he had read in Jiwoo's note. The meaning, still echoing in his mind, had unsettled something deep within him. He moved slower, more thoughtfully, scanning the faces of his students with a newfound vigilance. When Jiwoo walked in, her shoulders hunched as always, he followed, her silently with his eyes. She took her seat by the window, a place where the sun barely reached, and took out her notebook with mechanical precision. Class began as scheduled. Seongmin delivered his lecture with professional clarity, but his gaze often drifted toward Jiwoo. He noticed things he had not seen before, the thinness of her wrists, the way she never made eye contact, the small bruises that peeked out from beneath her sleeves. As he paced the classroom discussing metaphors and tone, he caught her glancing at him once, just once, and in that brief connection, he saw it again. That same silent plea. The bell rang, dismissing the class, and the students spilled out, but whispers began to trail behind them. Did you see how the teacher looked at her? They're always whispering with each other. I heard. She gave him a letter. The rumors, like weeds, had begun to take root. They had not yet reached full bloom, but the soil had been prepared by years of adolescent gossip and suspicion. By the end of the day, Seongmin overheard the fragments of speculation in the hallway. Some students laughed it off, others whispered, in dark corners, his name, Jiwoo's name, together. At first he tried to ignore it. Surely it would pass. Students always talked, always invented stories. But as he walked past the lockers, he caught the way some of his colleagues looked at him. Quick glances, then silence. That evening, he reviewed Jiwoo's note again, now locked inside the drawer of his home desk. The handwriting was careful, almost calligraphic, but the message, it held a pain that weighed more than its words. The following day, Seongmin found his classroom unusually quiet before the first bell. Several students sat in their places, glancing repeatedly toward the back of the room. Jiwoo's desk was empty. His stomach tightened. She arrived 2 minutes before the bell, her expression neutral, but her steps hesitant. As she walked to her desk, a piece of crumpled paper bounced off her backpack. Laughter followed. She did not turn around. Hey, Jiwoo, forgot to write another love letter, someone called. The room erupted in low chuckles. Seongmin stepped forward, silencing the room with a sharp look. That's enough, he said, his voice firmer than usual. We're here to study, not to spread nonsense. But the damage had been done. Jiwoo's hands trembled as she opened her notebook, and her gaze never left the pages for the rest of the lesson. When the bell rang, she didn't wait. She was gone before anyone else had packed up. In the teacher's lounge, Seongmin tried to address it indirectly. He brought up the issue of student welfare in passing conversation, probing gently. The responses were indifferent, polite nods, no real engagement. That was when he decided to speak to the principal directly. The office was sterile, filled with plaques and certificates that bore no signs of the children they were meant to serve. Principal Hyejin was a woman in her late 50s, always impeccably dressed, always distant. She listened as Seongmin spoke, carefully omitting the letter but describing his concern about Jiwoo's well-being and the bullying he had witnessed. Bullying is unfortunately not uncommon, she said, folding her hands on the desk. We try our best. But students, will be students. She's isolated, he insisted. I believe there's something more going on. The principal offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. There are many students with difficult circumstances. It's not our place to intervene beyond academic matters. I recommend you remain within your role. He left her office more frustrated than he had entered. On his walk home, the streets of Busan felt colder than usual. The sun dipped early behind the apartment buildings, casting long shadows on the pavement. He couldn't shake the image of Ji-woo's face, nor the quiet despair behind her eyes. That night he sat at his desk again, reading her note for the third time. The words hadn't changed, but their weight had grown heavier. He wondered what kind of world could allow a student to carry such sorrow in silence. He had always believed in teaching through empathy, in connecting with his students beyond the curriculum. But this was something different. This wasn't about literature, it was about survival. He slept poorly again, haunted by questions without answers. At dawn, he found himself staring at his reflection in the mirror, asking himself what it meant to be a teacher. Was it simply to deliver knowledge, or was it, as he had always hoped, to guide, to see the unseen? At school, things worsened. Ji-woo was now a subject of open speculation. Someone had drawn a crude caricature of her and Seong-min on the blackboard. Before class. It was erased before she arrived, but the air was thick with the residue of laughter. She seemed smaller that day, more withdrawn. Seong-min watched her during the lesson, unable to ignore the silent storm swirling around them. After class, he tried to approach her, but she darted away before he could speak. That evening, he sat alone in the teacher's lounge, staring at the vending machine without hunger. A colleague, Mr. Yoon, sat beside him briefly. Students are talking, Yoon said. You should be careful. Even a rumor can become something inconvenient. Seong-min didn't reply. He didn't need to. The lines had already been drawn, and he was standing on the edge of something larger than he had anticipated. The days that followed blurred into a sequence of awkward silences, sidelong glances and unspoken tensions. The air in Seong-min's classroom felt heavier, thick with the weight of speculation. The students no longer whispered as subtly as before. Now their glances lingered longer, their comments carried less restraint. Ji-woo, still seated in her corner, had become the eye of a storm she didn't create, and Seong-min, despite all his caution, was now firmly in its path. One morning, a cluster of students lingered outside the classroom door before the bell, their voices low but unmistakably pointed. She's always with him after class. Maybe she's got something on him. Didn't she give him a letter? I bet it was a love confession. Seong-min opened the door quietly, catching just enough to understand. The students fell silent instantly, slipping into their seats with feigned innocence. He walked to the front of the room and began the lesson without acknowledging what he had heard. But his grip on the chalk was a little tighter, his voice less fluid. Ji-woo didn't look up once. After class, Seong-min gathered his materials slowly, giving the students time to leave. Ji-woo stayed behind, as if she had anticipated his pace. She approached the desk, her steps cautious. This time she didn't offer a note. She simply stood there, looking at him with eyes that held equal parts apology and fear. I didn't mean to cause trouble, she said, voice barely audible. He shook his head gently. You didn't. They just don't understand. She hesitated before speaking again. They're starting to follow me. After school. The quinoa. Words struck him with immediate alarm. What do you mean? Ji-woo glanced toward the hallway before answering. 2 girls. From class. I think they're trying to scare me. Yesterday they threw water on my bag, said I should stop trying to seduce you. Seong-min felt his chest tighten. He had feared this moment, feared that her isolation would evolve into aggression. Now it was no longer subtle, it had become cruel. I'll handle it, he said, trying to mask the unease in his voice. You can't, she replied quietly. They'll say it's favoritism. She was right. The students had already twisted their connection into something scandalous. Any overt defense might only make things worse. Seong-min felt trapped, constrained by the very system that was supposed to protect students like her. Still, he refused to be passive. Later that day, he visited the administrative office, requesting a meeting with the school counselor. The counselor, a woman named Mi Young, listened with professional detachment as he explained the growing hostility directed at Jiwoo. "She's quiet," Mi Young said, tapping her pen against a clipboard. "Students like her sometimes attract this kind of attention. The other kids don't know how to react." "She's being harassed," Seong-min insisted. "And not just emotionally, they're targeting her after school." Mi Young sighed. "Unless we have a formal complaint or a witness, there's not much we can do. We can keep an eye on her. Maybe call her in for a few sessions." "She won't come," he said more sharply than intended. "She doesn't trust anyone here." Mi Young offered a sympathetic nod. "Then maybe we need to rebuild that trust. But slowly, carefully." Frustrated but unwilling to give up, Seong-min decided to take another approach. He began incorporating lessons into his curriculum that touched on themes of empathy, alienation, and cruelty, masked as humor. They read passages from Kafka, discussed Sartre's isolation, dissected poems about silence and unseen pain. It wasn't subtle, and some students caught on. One afternoon, as he concluded a discussion on emotional invisibility in literature, a boy in the front row raised his hand. "Is this about Jiwoo?" he asked, half serious. Seong-min met his gaze evenly. "It's about all of you, all of thus, about seeing what we usually ignore." The classroom was silent for a beat too long. Then the bell rang, scattering the weight of the conversation into the hallway noise. But the idea had been planted. That evening, Jiwoo didn't leave immediately. She lingered at her desk until the others had gone. Then she approached once more. "Thank you for today," she said. He gave a small nod. "You're not invisible." "Not to me." That night he walked home in the early dusk, passing by the riverbank where the city lights shimmered on the water. The wind carried the sharpness of the approaching winter. He thought of Jiwoo's eyes, of the silent terror she carried, and of the institution that allowed such things to fester in plain sight. He realized then that silence wasn't just a burden, it was a choice, and he would not choose it again. But the silence from above was deafening. The principal had not followed up. The counselor sent a brief note thanking him for his concern, but no action was visible. The two girls suspected of harassing Jiwoo continued with impunity, emboldened by the lack of consequence, and in the background, the rumors continued to spread. In the faculty room, Mr. Do-hyun, an older teacher known for his conservative views, approached Seong-min with a thin smile. "I've heard you're quite invested in one of your students," he said. "Careful, young man. We live in an age of misunderstandings." There was no warmth in his tone, only accusation disguised as advice. Seong-min met his gaze with steady resolve. "If standing up for a student is considered improper, maybe we need to redefine what teaching means." Do-hyun chuckled. "Just be careful where your empathy leads. People might start asking questions." And so the quiet war deepened, not just in the halls of the school, but within its walls of protocol and complacency. And at the center of it all was a girl with tired eyes and a note that still burned in the drawer of a man who refused to look away. The tension inside Haeundae Public High School was now a quiet throb beneath its polished surface. Students moved. Through the corridors as usual, teachers exchanged pleasantries in the faculty lounge, and lessons proceeded according to schedule. But for Seong-min, the rhythm had shifted irreversibly. The hallway smiles no longer felt genuine, and the echo of casual footsteps sounded to him like warnings. Every look held suspicion. Every pause between words was a loaded silence. At the heart of his unease remained Jiwoo, whose presence in class had grown even more discreet. She barely moved, barely spoke, but her quietness had become deafening. She arrived just before the bell and left as soon as it rang. Seong-min tried, on more than one occasion, to offer her some form of reassurance, but she only responded with nods, sometimes grateful, sometimes distant. It was on a grey Wednesday that Seong-min finally demanded a second meeting with Principal Hae-jin. He entered her office and closed the door behind him, a rare assertiveness in his stride. "I'm not here to speak in hypotheticals anymore," he began, standing instead of sitting. There is a serious issue involving Jiwoo. The bullying has escalated, and I believe the school has a duty to intervene. Principal Hye-jin looked up from her desk slowly. Her eyes were tired, lined with the weight of years spent navigating bureaucracy. Still, her voice remained smooth, practiced. "Mr. Seong-min," she said, motioning to the chair across from her. "Please sit. I'd rather stand." A pause passed between them. She exhaled lightly. "We've been made aware of the situation. The counselor has reported your concerns, but as I said before, unless there's formal documentation or direct evidence, our hands are tied." He leaned forward slightly. "So you're saying that until a student is physically hurt, or worse, you won't act?" She didn't flinch. "This school has over 900 students. We deal with dozens of behavioral reports each month. If we pursued every rumor, every whispered complaint, we'd be paralyzed. We must prioritize what's actionable." "This is actionable. I've witnessed it myself." "Then file a report," she replied, her tone calm but absolute. "In writing, with names, witnesses, specific dates. Only then can we proceed with disciplinary action." Seong-min knew the trap. Filing a report would mean exposing Jiwoo directly. Naming her aggressors could lead to retaliation, deepen her isolation, and possibly provoke their parents, some of whom wielded considerable influence. Without Jiwoo's cooperation, it would turn into a dead end, or worse, a scandal that harmed her even further. "And if I can't provide that," he asked quietly, "then I strongly suggest you let this matter rest," she said. "Focus on your curriculum. Let the appropriate channels do their work." He left the office feeling as though he had walked straight into a locked vault. The system, he now understood, was not designed to protect individuals. It was built to protect itself. That evening, after school had ended and the halls were quiet, Seong-min returned to his classroom to retrieve some papers. As he entered, he found Jiwoo already there, standing by the window. The fading sunlight cast her in silhouette. "I saw you go into the principal's office," she said, without turning. "I wanted them to help," he replied. "They won't," she said, her voice soft but steady. "They never do." There was no bitterness in her tone, just resignation, worn smooth by repetition. Seong-min stepped closer, unsure of how to break the silence that followed. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Not as your teacher, but as someone who cares." She turned to face him then, and in her eyes he saw an exhaustion too old for her age. "Are you safe at home?" The question hovered between them, raw and dangerous. For a long time she said nothing. Then, with a small shake of her head, she answered, "No." It was not a dramatic moment. No tears, no collapse into his arms, just a word, quiet and final. "Is there anyone I can contact?" he asked gently. "A relative, a neighbor?" She shook her head again. "Just my brother," she said. "He's younger. He's all I have." The weight of her confession settled on his shoulders like stone. He wanted to ask more, to press for details, but he saw the warning in her eyes. She had taken a risk in speaking even that much. He would not betray her trust by pushing further. Not yet. "I'll find a way to help," he said. Her reply was a whisper. "They'll make it worse if you try." And then she left. That night, Seong-min sat in his apartment, the walls pressing in tighter than usual. The city lights outside blinked indifferently. He thought of all the stories he had taught over the years, of suffering, of injustice, of resilience, and how distant they always felt. Now one of those stories had found him, and this time he couldn't turn the page and move on. He began, researching. Quietly, without alerting the school, he looked up social services, emergency shelters, child protection protocols. He printed out contact numbers, filled notebooks with information, wrote draft letters he never sent. Each page was a promise to himself that he would not let Jiwoo vanish into silence. The next morning, as he passed by the bulletin board in the teacher's corridor, he noticed something new, a staff meeting notice, mandatory attendance. Topic: professional conduct and boundaries. He knew what it meant. The whispers had reached the administration. And now the walls were beginning to close around him too. The staff meeting took place in the school auditorium, a room that smelled faintly of chalk dust and varnish, where the curtains had not been drawn in years. Teachers filed in with the subdued energy of those who knew the meeting would say much without saying anything at all. Principal Hee-jin stood at the front, flanked by a vice principal and the school counselor. Her voice, as always, was poised and rehearsed. She spoke of boundaries, of professionalism, of how certain relationships between teachers and students could be easily misunderstood, of the importance of maintaining institutional trust and integrity. Names were not spoken, but eyes drifted subtly, some curious, some accusatory, toward Seong-min. He sat with his hands folded, jaw tense, unmoving. Afterward, in the hall, the whispers grew legs. Mr. Do-hyun passed him with a half-smile. "Policy first, heart second," he said in a tone laced with mockery. Seong-min didn't reply. He returned to his classroom and closed the door behind him, the noise of the faculty fading instantly. That was when he saw it. A new assignment lay in his inbox, submitted by Ji-woo. A literature prompt he had given days earlier, asking students to write about a place where truth hides. Most had submitted metaphors of forests, dreams, or closed books. Ji-woo's essay was different. Its title, "A Room Without Light." He sat down and began to read. There is a room with no windows and no door. It does not lock because there is nothing to protect. Inside, someone pretends to sleep. The floor is cold metal. The ceiling creaks with the wind. Sometimes the rain comes through the corners and soaks everything. But still, it is better than being seen. In this room, truth sits in silence. It doesn't speak because no one is listening. When footsteps come near, the truth folds itself into smaller and smaller pieces, like paper crushed in a fist. The footsteps pass and the silence returns. The person in the room is good at pretending to sleep, pretending to study, pretending to eat. The pretending is the only warmth left. But pretending makes truth angry. Truth wants to scream. It starts small, like hunger, like shaking hands, like bruises that don't heal. But then truth grows claws. It scratches from the inside. And if it ever gets out, it might burn everything. So the person in the room keeps the door gone. The windows shut, the light off, because if anyone sees the truth, they might look away. And being ignored is worse than being alone. Seong-min stopped reading. His eyes remained on the last paragraph for what felt like minutes. The essay was fiction, technically. No names, no places. But everything was there, laid bare in metaphors. Confessions disguised as poetry. It wasn't an essay. It was a flare sent up from a dark ocean. He printed it. Not to expose her, but to keep it safe. The next day he adjusted his lesson plan. He asked the class to read select passages from Yi-sang's writings, poems written during eras of suppression, about inner torment and silent battles. When Ji-woo heard the name, her eyes lifted. She knew the reference. She always knew. After class she didn't approach him, but she lingered at the back of the room. Seong-min remained seated at his desk, busying himself with papers to give her time. "You read it," she finally said. He looked up. "Yes." "I almost didn't." "Submit it." "I'm glad you did." She hesitated before speaking again. "It's not fiction. You know that, right?" "I know." Silence passed between them again. Not heavy, just present. "Did you tell anyone?" she asked. "No, it's not mine to tell." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. She turned to leave, then paused. "My brother's name is Min-jun," she said. "He's 9. It was the first personal detail she had ever shared, a thread of real life, amidst the metaphor. Then she was gone. That afternoon, Seong-min requested another meeting with the school counselor. He brought Ji-woo's essay, carefully redacted of her name, and laid it on the desk. "This was written by a student in my class," he said. "It needs to be read carefully. Then something needs to be done." Counselor Mi-young read the essay silently. When she finished, she didn't speak right away. "Do you know who wrote this?" she finally asked. "Yes." "Will she confirm it's hers?" No, and I won't force her to. Mi-young leaned back, sighing. It's powerful, but without a name, it's just literature. It's a map, he said, and someone needs to follow it. The counselor promised to look into it, but Seong-min had begun to understand the language of administration. It meant she would file it, maybe discuss it in a closed-door meeting, maybe nothing at all. He left the office knowing he had reached another limit. That night, unable to shake the essay from his mind, Seong-min took a different route home. He walked through the neighborhood where he vaguely remembered Jiwoo saying she lived, one of Busan's older districts, dotted with half-demolished buildings and construction fencing. He didn't expect to find her. He wasn't even sure why he had come. But then, behind a cluster of rusting metal containers near a construction site, he saw movement. A small figure, too small, was climbing into one of the containers. His breath caught. He stepped closer slowly until he could see through the cracked door. There was a mattress inside, thin and discolored, a few books stacked in the corner, a single dim bulb hanging from a wire, and in the corner, curled beneath a blanket, was a child, Min-jun. And then Jiwoo appeared, crouched next to him, placing a hand gently on his forehead. She turned, saw Seong-min, and froze. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. No metaphor could hide what he saw now. And the truth was far worse than anything she had written. The next morning, the school halls felt narrower. Seong-min arrived earlier than usual, his footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. He had not slept. The image of Jiwoo and her brother, inside that metal container, was burned into him. More than any essay, more than any whispered rumor. It was no longer a matter of interpretation. It was fact. And facts, he knew, were harder to ignore. As he turned the corner toward the staff room, he nearly collided with Mr. Do-hyun. The older man stepped back, eyeing Seong-min with the smirk of someone expecting guilt to show itself. "In quite a rush, aren't we?" he said. Seong-min nodded without humor and attempted to move past, but Do-hyun stopped him with a casual hand on the arm. "I hear you've taken a special interest in that quiet girl. Jiwoo, is it?" The words came slowly, each syllable soaked in suspicion. Seong-min pulled away gently. "If you're concerned about a student's well-being, there are channels for that." Do-hyun chuckled. "You speak like a lawyer, not a teacher. It doesn't suit you." With that, he walked away, leaving behind the subtle but unmistakable message. You are being watched. In the faculty lounge, Seong-min found several teachers whispering over steaming cups of coffee. Conversations ceased. When he entered, only one younger teacher, Ms. Ha-eun, gave him a brief nod of acknowledgement. He took his seat silently and pretended to review lesson plans, though his mind was elsewhere. The walls were closing in. During his second class, Jiwoo arrived late by a minute. Her eyes were downcast, and the bruise near her left wrist was darker today. She didn't offer an explanation. She sat in silence, as she always did, but her breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. When another student tossed a paper ball in her direction, Seong-min stood suddenly, more forcefully than intended. "Who did that?" Silence. The class froze. No one answered. "I asked a question," he repeated, his voice firmer. Still, silence. Jiwoo didn't look up. Seong-min let the moment linger, then spoke again, quieter now. "I hope you all remember that silence one day when you wish someone had spoken up for you." He turned back to the board, but the tone of the room had shifted. Eyes now flickered, with a different kind of awareness. After class, Jiwoo waited. "I didn't ask you to follow me yesterday," she said without emotion. "I know," he replied. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to." She glanced over her shoulder, at the door, then back to him. "I don't want you getting in trouble because of me." "I already am," he said softly. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then she pulled out another folded piece of paper and placed it on his desk. "This is what I didn't write in the essay." And she left. Alone, Seong-min unfolded it. The handwriting was hurried this time, the lines uneven. But the words were clear. "I sleep next to the door because if someone breaks in, they'll see me first. I don't eat at school because the food makes my brother hungry, and I can't explain that. When it rains, we get wet inside. When it's cold, we stay awake. I'm not asking for help. I'm asking not to disappear." He sat there for a long time, the note trembling slightly in his hands. That afternoon he went to the administrative office again. This time he did not ask for a meeting. He entered unannounced and placed both of Ji-woo's notes on the principal's desk. "This is not a formal complaint," he said. "But it's a cry for help. If this school ignores it, then it becomes complicit." Principal Hyejin looked up at him, blinking slowly. "You're crossing lines, Mr. Seong-min." "So be it." He left without waiting for a response. But crossing that line came with consequences. That evening, he received an official notice from the school. An internal review had been opened into his conduct regarding interactions with individual students. Effective immediately, he was to be placed on temporary administrative leave, pending the outcome of the investigation. The letter was worded carefully, as all institutional reprimands are. It spoke of preserving professional integrity, of preventing misunderstandings. But what it meant was simple. He was being silenced. He sat on the edge of his bed, the letter in one hand, the note from Ji-woo in the other. Outside, the city breathed on without him. Neon signs flickered, cars moved, people lived. But in that moment, it felt as though the world had shrunk to two pieces of paper, one condemning, one pleading. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain: the truth now had consequences. And Ji-woo had disappeared. The morning after the suspension, Seong-min stood outside the school gates, not as a teacher but as an outsider. The steel fence looked taller now, as if it had grown overnight. Students walked past him without recognition, a few casting curious glances, others ignoring him entirely. The weight of invisibility had shifted from Ji-woo to him. He had become the man on the margin. He spent the rest of the day not at home but on foot, retracing the path that had led him to Ji-woo's hidden world. He wandered through the back alleys of the district near the construction site, hoping to see her, hoping to find signs that she and Min-jun were safe, but the container was empty now. The door hung slightly ajar, the thin mattress was gone. No books, no light bulb, just rusted walls and silence. He knocked on nearby doors, asked the elderly shopkeeper at the corner market, the cleaner at the construction fence, the deliveryman unloading boxes behind the convenience store. Most didn't know anything. One man, an older resident who had seen them once or twice, said he thought the girl and the boy had left 2 nights ago, disappeared, just like that. That evening, exhausted and with no direction, Seong-min sat on a bench facing the water. He stared out at the sea as if the waves could offer a clue. The wind whipped against his coat, sharp and indifferent. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the notes he had gathered. Addresses, agencies, phone numbers. He had waited long enough. He called a local NGO that provided assistance to children in vulnerable conditions. The woman on the other, and Ms. Jang, listened patiently as he explained everything, carefully, clearly, and without omitting a single detail. "So we have protocols," she said. "But if what you're saying is accurate, this is an emergency. I'll come to your office," he replied. He did. That same evening, he sat in a bare room under harsh fluorescent lights, answering questions from caseworkers. They took down Ji-woo's full name, the name of her brother, her grade, the school, and everything he had observed: the notes, the essay, the bruises, the absence of adult supervision. Ms. Jang asked for a copy of Ji-woo's writing. He provided it. They promised to start the search, but the next morning it was he who received the call. "We found her," Ms. Jang said, "and her brother. They're alive." Seong-min felt something loosen inside him, something that had been clenched for days. "They're not in good condition," she continued, "severely undernourished. The boy had a mild fever. Ji-woo refused to speak at first, but she asked for you." He was given the address of a temporary shelter, modest, operated by a local organization. It was on the edge of the city, hidden behind a line of apartment complexes. When he arrived, a volunteer met him at the gate. The building was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of antiseptic and boiled rice. Inside, children moved softly through the corridors, clutching toys or blankets. The volunteer led him to a room at the end of the hall. There she was. Ji-woo sat cross-legged on a mattress, Min-jun curled up beside her. He was asleep, a small IV attached to his arm. She looked thinner, her hair tangled, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. But she was there. When she saw him, her lips parted, unsure. He stepped inside slowly. "I'm not here as a teacher," he said, "just as someone who cares." She didn't speak. She only nodded. He sat on the floor near her, leaving space between them. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment, "that it came to this." She looked at Minjun. "It wasn't your fault. I should have left earlier. They were watching you. I couldn't stop them, but I can help now." She held his gaze. "I don't want to go back. Not to school. Not yet. You don't have to. Not until you're ready." Outside, the room Ms. Jiang waited. When Seong-min emerged, she briefed him on the situation. Ji-woo and Min-jun had no living relatives in the region. Their mother had died almost exactly 1 year ago from a stroke. The father had disappeared months before that. The children had slipped through the cracks. No property, no guardianship claim, no school alerts filed. For the system, they barely existed. "How did no one notice?" he asked. Miss Jiang shrugged tiredly. "They hide too well. Kids like them learn how to become invisible." Seong-min offered everything he had, his notes, his testimony, his willingness to testify if needed. Ms. Jiang thanked him. A formal inquiry would begin, she said, to determine how both the school and local agencies had failed to intervene sooner. That evening, back at his apartment, Seong-min received another message. This one from the school. A hearing had been scheduled. The board would review his case. There were concerns, the message said, about his involvement with a student outside school grounds. Until the hearing, he was forbidden to contact any students or re-enter school property. He stared at the message, then closed the laptop. Because somewhere in a shelter on the edge of Busan, a girl and her brother were alive. And for now that mattered more than anything. The summons arrived printed on thick school letterhead, folded into a sterile white envelope. The language was formal, distant, an invitation dressed as a threat. The hearing would be held in 1 week's time at the main district office. The board would consider allegations of professional misconduct, including inappropriate attention toward a minor and breach of institutional protocol. No mention was made of Ji-woo's condition or of the reasons behind Seong-min's actions, only the consequences. He placed the letter on his desk and stared at it for a long time. It was strange how such a small object could carry the weight of his entire career, a decade of teaching, dozens of commendations, a life devoted to literature and youth, all of it now distilled into cold, ambiguous phrasing. The news of his suspension had reached the community. Though no official statement had been made, the rumors filled in the gaps. Former students messaged him cautiously, unsure of what to believe. Some parents had begun calling the school. Others demanded transparency. Online forums buzzed with speculation. A few defended him. Most were simply curious. In the meantime, Ji-woo remained at the shelter. She spoke rarely, but Ms. Jiang said she was starting to eat more, to sleep without nightmares. Min-jun, once feverish and listless, had begun to play with other children. Slowly their outlines were returning, their presence reasserting itself in a world that had once tried to erase them. But the institution that should have protected them now turned inward to protect itself. Seong-min spent his days assembling every piece of evidence he could gather. He printed copies of Ji-woo's essays, annotated them with context. He collected his own logs, emails, timestamps, notes from meetings. He documented his initial attempts to involve school administration, the rejection by the principal, the silence that followed. Ms. Jiang agreed to testify if needed. The shelter's director, too. Still, the case would not be decided by truth alone. It was during this tense lull that Ji-woo disappeared from the shelter. Ms. Jiang called him in a panic late one evening. Ji-woo and Min-jun were gone. No warning. No trace. "We checked the cameras," she said. "She must have left just after lights out. Quiet, deliberate. She knew how to vanish." Seong-min's heart sank. He knew that disappearance was not a rebellion. It was protection. Ji-woo had lived on the margins too long. Surveillance felt like threat. Rules like traps. He returned. to the container site that night. Rain fell steadily, soaking through his coat. The metal shell was still empty. No sign of return. He walked the perimeter of the neighborhood, checked the park, the back entrances of convenience stores. Nothing. Back at his apartment, he stared at the phone, waiting. He left the porch light on. The next day, he went to the shelter again. He spoke with Minjun's caseworker. They were initiating a search with local authorities, but the girl had left no digital trail, no phone, no bank card, nothing. Later that afternoon, he sat with Ms. Jiang in her office. "She doesn't trust the system," he said. "Would you?" "No," he admitted. Ms. Jiang hesitated, then slid an envelope across the table. She left this, just in case. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. Jiwoo's handwriting. "Thank you for seeing me," it read, "even when it made things harder. But I can't let anyone else pay for my life. My brother is safe. That's all that matters now. Please stop trying to save what's already broken." He closed the letter slowly, fingers pressed against the paper as if it might vanish. "She's not broken," he said. "She's surviving." Ms. Jiang nodded. "But even survivors get tired." The hearing drew closer. The district board prepared their statements. The school's legal representative began shaping the narrative. A teacher who blurred professional lines, who acted without authorization, who may have compromised student safety. Facts were twisted by omission, context erased. Jiwoo's disappearance became a shadow looming over the proceedings. On the morning of the hearing, Seong-min dressed in a dark suit and stood in front of the mirror. He looked older, not tired, but stripped of illusions. When he arrived at the district office, reporters were already gathering outside. He avoided their questions and entered through a side door. The hearing room was small, sterile. A panel of 5 board members sat at the front. To their left, a school administrator. To their right, a legal advisor. He was seated alone. The questions began politely, then sharpened. "Why did you continue to interact with this student outside official school functions?" She was in danger. No one else was helping. "Did you ever report your concerns through the school's designated channels?" "Yes. I was ignored." "Do you have documentation?" He handed them his folder. Pages upon pages of dates, conversations, refusals. The board murmured, flipping through the evidence. Then, "You visited the student's neighborhood alone. Was that appropriate?" "I found her living in an abandoned container with her brother." "And you didn't contact the police?" "I contacted a social worker. The police would have taken them into state custody without context." The questions continued for over 2 hours. By the end, his voice was hoarse. The board dismissed him while they deliberated. Outside, he waited on the steps. The rain had returned. It always seemed to follow him now. That's when he saw her, Jiwoo, standing across the street under a black umbrella, alone, watching. He stood slowly. She didn't cross, didn't wave, but her presence said everything. He stayed there, unmoving, until she disappeared into the crowd. The verdict came 2 days after the hearing. Seong-min sat in his apartment, the envelope in his hands trembling, slightly despite his best efforts. He opened it slowly, each tear of the paper sounding louder than it should. The letter was brief. The board had not found sufficient evidence to terminate his employment, but due to procedural breaches and inappropriate discretion, his suspension would remain in place until further notice. The school reserved the right to assign him to administrative duties if reinstated. No apology, no recognition of the risk he took, only bureaucracy, paper thin and razor sharp. He folded the letter carefully and set it beside Jiwoo's last note. They belonged together, truth reduced to ink, pain contained in formal tone. That evening he visited Ms. Jiang again at the shelter. She met him with tired eyes and a quiet nod. "We haven't found her yet," she said. "The authorities have filed a missing child report, but there's been no movement on her bank record, school data, or street cams." "She's smart," Seong-min said. "She knows how to disappear." "We know, but that doesn't make it any easier." Minjun remained at the shelter, quiet but responsive. He asked once about his sister. The staff answered with vague reassurances, the kind meant for children. She's looking for a safe place. She'll be back soon. She loves you very much. And Min Jun, with the trusting heart of a child, accepted it. At least, for now. Seong Min didn't return home that night. He sat instead in a quiet cafe across town, reviewing everything he had gathered: notes, names, dates, conversations. In the silence of that small corner, he made a decision. He would not let the story end in disappearance. He began by tracing the past. At the local records office, he requested the school enrollment history of Ji-woo and her brother. Bureaucratic. Resistance slowed him down, but his teacher ID still held some weight. He found that Ji-woo had enrolled at 3 different schools in the last 5 years. At each one, she had withdrawn mid-term. Reasons listed: relocation, family emergency, non-response, always the same silence, no follow-ups, no red flags. He traveled to one of the old addresses listed in her past files, a neighborhood in northern Busan, now partly demolished. What remained were concrete skeletons, graffiti-covered walls, and a few scattered residents who refused to leave. He found an older woman sweeping the steps of a convenience shop that barely stayed open. "Did a girl named Ji-woo live here?" he asked, showing an old school photo. The woman squinted. "I remember her. Lived in that building over there, 3rd floor, Unit B, with her mother. Quiet girl, always polite." "What happened to them?" The woman shrugged. "The mother died, stroke, they said. After that, I don't know. The kids vanished. No family came." Back in the city, Seong Min dug deeper. He visited the local registry. No father listed on Ji-woo's birth certificate. The mother's file was closed with a hospital code indicating death from cerebral hemorrhage. No next of kin. He moved to the next thread: hospital records. At the emergency clinic near the construction site, he found a nurse who remembered Ji-woo. "She came here twice," the nurse said. "Bruises, one time with the boy. Said she fell, always said she fell." "Did anyone report it?" The nurse hesitated. "We asked. She refused help. No adult contact. We filed it, but no one followed up. Happens more than you'd think." Each piece of the story fell into place, like shattered glass reassembling into a mirror. Ji-woo's life had been a series of silent alarms, each one ignored, each system too slow or too skeptical to care. Now she had vanished. And still, no one was looking but him. He returned to the neighborhood near the container and walked its alleys again. Late into the evening, he scanned the shadows for movement. He visited corner stores and soup kitchens. He asked quietly, showed her photo discreetly. Sometimes people nodded vaguely. A girl like that? Maybe. Couldn't say for sure. At a small ramen shop, the owner pointed toward a side street. "She asked for food there last week," he said. Didn't say much. Gave her a bowl. She thanked me and left. It was something. A breadcrumb. The next morning, Seong Min returned with sandwiches and left them where the girl might pass. He wrote a note. "You're not alone. Min Jun is safe. Please come back." He returned every day for the rest of the week. Sometimes the food was gone, sometimes it wasn't. The note was never taken, but one evening a new message appeared in its place, scribbled quickly on the back of his original paper. "You did. Enough, stop following me." He didn't recognize the handwriting immediately. It was messier, hurried, but the tone was hers. Protective, distant, yet deeply aware. He folded the message and placed it in his coat pocket. His instincts warred with his conscience. She was alive, that mattered. But alive didn't mean safe, and she was still running. Later that night, he sat on the riverbank near Gwangali, where the lights from the bridge painted the water in shifting colors. He thought of all the students he had taught over the years, of all the essays written, read, forgotten. Ji-woo's words had stayed. They echoed now, louder than ever. Truth folds itself into smaller and smaller pieces, but truth never vanishes, and he would not let it. The city of Busan moved with indifferent rhythm, its trains screeching past stations, its buses weaving through morning traffic, its citizens flowing like rivers around each other, each consumed with their own momentum. In that movement, Seong Min found only friction. He was no longer part of the current. His days began without the ritual of school, without the rhythm of chalk on board, without the murmurs of students filing into desks. Instead, he awoke to silence, and every hour not spent searching for Ji-woo felt like a betrayal. It was a Monday when Ms. Jang called again. Her voice was urgent. "She's back." He stood from his desk immediately. "Where?" "At the shelter. Just now." Walked in like she had never left. Her clothes were soaked. She wouldn't speak. She just asked if her brother was still here. He arrived within the hour. Ji-woo sat in the infirmary, wrapped in a blanket, her hair plastered to her face, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. Min-jun clung to her side, arms wrapped around her waist. He looked healthier, stronger, but now frightened in a different way, aware that his sister was falling apart before him. She didn't speak when Seong-min entered. She didn't even look up. "I won't ask where you went," he said softly. "But I'm glad you came back." For a moment she didn't react. Then she gave a single nod, slight as breath. Later, in a quiet room away from the others, she sat across from him on the floor. The rain continued to fall outside, a steady whisper against the window pane. "I was going to disappear," she said, her voice thin. "I had places I thought I could go, abandoned stations, old stairwells, but everywhere I went, I kept thinking of Min-jun, and the sound he makes when he sleeps." Seong-min listened, careful not to interrupt. "I wanted to leave before they blamed you, but they already did. So I came back." He leaned forward slightly. "I can take the blame. I just couldn't. Take not knowing." She looked up then, eyes sharp. "I don't want to be saved, I want to be heard once." "You will be." She hesitated, then reached into the inner pocket of her oversized coat. She pulled out a small envelope, slightly torn at one corner, and placed it on the table between them. "What is it?" he asked. "My mother's notebook," she said. "The last one she kept before she died." He opened it carefully. Inside were pages of meticulous entries, expenses, dreams, fears. One page stood out, a list of emergency numbers she never called, a sketch of Ji-woo and Min-jun holding hands. Beneath it a phrase, "If I fail, please let someone else see them." Seong-min closed the notebook slowly. "She didn't fail," he said. "The world did." Ji-woo didn't reply. She didn't need to. The next step was no longer a question. That same week, Seong-min requested a meeting with the district's Social Services Oversight Committee. He brought Ms. Jang, the shelter's IDA director and a lawyer referred by a parent who had quietly followed the case. The purpose to file a formal claim of systemic negligence against Haeundae Public High School and associated municipal offices responsible for child welfare monitoring. At first, the committee responded with formality. They reviewed documents, stamped pages, cited procedure, but the presence of Ji-woo's mother's notebook changed everything. The personal, handwritten entries, coupled with Ji-woo's essays and physical condition, formed a narrative too compelling to dismiss. It was decided a public hearing would be scheduled, witnesses would be called, testimonies gathered. As news of the hearing reached the school, murmurs ignited again, this time among parents. Some were angry, others were confused. A few, brave enough, contacted Seong-min to offer support. Former students began to post on social media, defending him, sharing memories of his teaching, his dedication. One wrote, "He made us feel seen. Now someone needs to see him." The school board, sensing pressure, tried to regain control. They released a vague statement. "We are cooperating with all investigations and reaffirm our commitment to student welfare." But behind closed doors, Principal Hai-jin convened emergency staff meetings. Teachers were instructed to limit statements, to avoid media engagement, to refer all inquiries to the board. Mr. Do-hyun, ever opportunistic, used the moment to suggest that the school had lost its moral compass due to modern overreach. Still, something had changed. The silence, once weaponized, had begun to fracture. On the morning of the publicus hearing, a crowd gathered in the district hall. Parents, journalists, school staff, NGO workers, students, curious onlookers. Seong-min entered with Ms. Jang, followed by Ji-woo and Min-jun. The girl wore a dark hoodie, her hair pulled back, her face calm but unreadable. The panel sat behind long tables, Microphones aligned in front of them. Cameras flashed. The room hummed with anticipation. Seong-min spoke first. He recounted his initial observations of Ji-woo, the first note, the failed meeting with the principal, the essays, the bruises, the discovery of the container, the silence that followed. Then Ji-woo spoke. Her voice, though soft, carried across the room. "No one ever asked why I sat in the back," she began. "No one asked why I never ate, or why my homework smelled like metal and mold. They assumed I was shy or strange, but I wasn't hiding, I was surviving." She paused, letting the words settle. "My brother is 9. He doesn't know what childhood means. He knows how to keep quiet, how not to cry, how to share one meal across 2 days." Another pause. Then, "I don't want pity. I want systems that listen the first time. I want teachers who don't have to break rules to save lives. I want my story not to be exceptional." The room was silent, even the panel, even the press. It was, finally, the silence that Ji-woo had broken, not with a scream, but with truth. And once truth was spoken, it could no longer be folded away. The day after the hearing, the story exploded. Local news agencies, starved for truth that resonated, ran features not just on Ji-woo and Seong-min, but on the failures of the institutions meant to protect children like them. Headlines read, "When the system turns away, and the student who slept in shadows." By mid-morning, the reports had crossed city limits, reaching national outlets and sparking public outcry across the country. Online, social media filled with messages of outrage, solidarity, and shame. Hashtags emerged. "Listen to students. Ji-woo deserves better. Teach and protect." Former students, parents, and even educators from other regions began sharing their own experiences of being ignored, misunderstood, or punished for doing what was right. Seong-min walked through Busan with new eyes. The people who once passed, without notice, now glanced at him with quiet recognition. Some offered brief nods. Others looked away, not from guilt, but from the discomfort of witnessing truth they could no longer ignore. The school, under pressure from multiple directions, was no longer able to hide behind procedure. A formal investigation was opened, not only into the specific case of Ji-woo, but into the broader patterns of neglect that had allowed so many warning signs to go unanswered. Teachers were questioned, policies re-examined. The principals, leadership came under fire. In the staff room, the atmosphere was no longer one of silence and compliance. Some teachers defended Seong-min openly now. Ms. Ha-yeon spoke in meetings, citing her own concerns about students previously dismissed. Even those who had once distanced themselves from him now watched quietly, unsure which way the wind was shifting. And it was shifting. For Ji-woo, the days after the hearing were quieter but different. She was no longer invisible. Offers came from advocacy groups, from scholarship foundations, even from educational institutions outside the city. But she remained wary. She stayed at the shelter with Min-jun, focusing on simple things: meals, sleep, the feel of a clean blanket. Healing, slow and fragile, had begun. One afternoon she asked to see Seong-min alone. They met in a small garden behind the shelter, where the autumn leaves had begun to fall, forming a quiet carpet of gold and brown. She sat on a bench, hands in her lap. "I didn't think they'd listen," she said. "Even when I spoke, I thought, well, it wouldn't matter." "It mattered," he replied. She looked at him then, really looked. "Are you going back?" "I don't know. Maybe, if they let me." "They should," he nodded slowly. "That doesn't mean they will." There was silence between them, the kind that comes not from distance but from shared exhaustion. Finally, she spoke again. "I don't want to be a story," she said. "I just want to study, sleep, be boring." "You will," he said, offering the faintest smile. "And one day someone else will sit in the back of a classroom and someone will notice. Because of you." That night, the school board released a public statement acknowledging their mishandling of the case. The principal was placed on administrative leave pending further review. A new interim head was appointed, someone from outside the district, with a background in social advocacy. The board also issued a formal invitation. They wanted Seong-min to return. But it was not simple. His name had been cleared, his reputation restored, yet the experience had changed him. He sat with the offer for a day, then two, before finally calling Ms. Jang to ask what she thought. "You belong in a classroom," she said, "but not the same one you left. That place needs to change, and maybe it needs you to help make that happen." He returned 1 week later. It was a rainy morning when he stepped through the school's front gates. The rain was lighter now, almost ceremonial. He walked the halls slowly, past lockers and bulletin boards, past students who fell silent upon seeing him, not with fear, but reverence. His first class was with the second-year students, the same group from before. The same classroom, the same desks, the same back corner seat. Empty. Ji-woo would not return to school yet. That would come later. But she had left something for him. On the desk, folded. Carefully was a blank piece of paper. At first glance it seemed untouched, but when he unfolded it he saw a single sentence written in her clean, deliberate handwriting. "Thank you for reading in silence, and for speaking when I couldn't." He placed the note in his pocket and turned to the class. "Today," he said, "we're not reading poetry, we're writing it." The students looked up, confused. "You're going to write about something no one ever asked you before. Something that hurts or heals or scares you." He wrote the prompt on the board. "What silence means to me." Around the room, pens began to move. Outside, the rain eased. Somewhere far from those walls, a girl named Ji-woo sat beside her brother, reading aloud from a borrowed book. Her voice, once hoarse from hiding, was steady now. And in a city just beginning to wake, others listened. The school days that followed. Seong-min's return carried a different rhythm. Students were quieter but more attentive. Teachers walked the corridors not with routine indifference, but with cautious awareness. Posters appeared on the walls, reminders of resources, phone, numbers, rights. A new protocol was introduced. Every student would have monthly one-on-one check-ins with a counselor. It was a start. Seong-min, though reinstated, returned not as he was, but as someone forged by rupture. He carried the classroom with the same care as before, but now his eyes read more than words on paper. He saw absence in posture, weariness, behind answers, the subtle signals that often went unnoticed. And he listened differently, without assumption, without rush. In the afternoons, he met with faculty working on the school's new Student Wellness Initiative. Ms. Ha-yun had taken a leading role, and together they revised how attendance patterns were tracked, how behavioral changes were flagged, how teachers could respond without fear of overstepping. There were still those who resisted. Mr. Do-hyun, stripped of his subtle influence, kept to himself now. He taught with the detachment of someone waiting out a storm. Other teachers whispered about liability, about overcorrection, about how things were different when they started teaching. But the momentum had shifted. Ji-woo had not yet returned to school, but her name had. Not as gossip, but as cause. Students referred to her in quiet admiration. Some, emboldened by her story, had begun to speak about their own situations, neglect at home, financial hardship, mental health struggles. The school, once deaf to quiet suffering, now found itself inundated with truth. One morning, Seong-min received an envelope without a sender. Inside was a hand-drawn portrait of a girl sitting under a streetlight, a boy asleep beside her, and a thin line of light stretching from a distant window. On the back, in small handwriting, "Someone always notices the light, even when you can't see it yourself." He kept it in his drawer. Meanwhile, Ji-woo and Min-jun had been moved to a long-term residential support center. It was not a permanent solution, but it was better. A stable environment with education programs, counseling, structure. Seong-min visited when permitted. Their meetings were short, careful, but meaningful. Ji-woo had started drawing again. She showed him a sketchbook filled with grayscale scenes, abandoned stairwells, silent train platforms, a container with a door made of vines. And always in the corner, two figures, one larger, standing, one smaller, reaching up. "You always make them look forward," he noted once. "They're not done running," she said, but now they know where to go. That week, a new local newspaper feature titled "Silent Classrooms, Loud Truths" ran a full article on Seong-min. It highlighted not only his actions, but also the transformation happening at the school. Other educators reached out, some with admiration, others with questions, a few with resistance veiled as curiosity. One email stood out. It came from a former student, now studying sociology at a university in Seoul. "I used to think you were too serious," the message read, "but now I see what you were trying to show us, how to read between the lines, not just in books. Thank you for not giving up." The school board, under pressure from public opinion and internal review, officially implemented a new student safety and welfare protocol. Every homeroom teacher would receive training in psychological first aid. Anonymous reporting systems were expanded, and Seong-min was invited to join a district-wide task force on vulnerable student identification. The transition was slow, painful, necessary, but amid these structural changes, quieter victories unfolded. Ji-woo, with permission from the residential center, visited the school one afternoon. It was a weekend, empty halls, quiet desks. She walked beside Seong-min through the corridor that once swallowed her whole. She stopped in front of her old classroom. "I hated this room," she said, "but I also miss it." "It's still yours," he replied, "when you're ready." She stepped inside, ran her hand across the desk in the back corner. "I used to count how many seconds I could go without being noticed. Now I want to see how long I can speak before someone interrupts." "How you won't be interrupted here," he said. She sat for a moment in silence. Then she stood again. "I'm not afraid of being seen anymore," she whispered. "I just want to matter when I am." As she left the room, her fingers lingered on the doorframe. The place that once enclosed her had changed, or maybe she had. Later that week, the school hosted a closed forum for students, staff, and a small group of parents. It was meant to create a space for discussion, to give shape to what had been learned. A seat was reserved for Ji-woo at the front, left empty but symbolically present. Seong-min spoke at the forum, not from a podium, but standing among the students. "There are children who sleep beside doors because they're afraid of being forgotten," he said. "They walk our halls every day, not because they want to be invisible, but because no one taught them they deserve to be seen." The room was quiet, a listening kind of quiet. He ended with the words Ji-woo had once written, "Being ignored is worse than being alone." No one clapped. No one needed to. Outside, the sky was overcast again, but the kind of grey that holds light behind it, waiting. Spring arrived slowly in Busan, announced by the subtle blooming of cherry blossoms along the school fence. The cold, metallic sting of winter faded into memory, leaving behind warmth that crept into the edges of windows, into empty hallways, into spaces that had long been quiet. And for the first time in what felt like years, Seong-min allowed himself to feel something like peace. Classes resumed with a quieter discipline. The school no longer felt like a machine, indifferent to its parts. It breathed now, cautiously, but consciously. In the classroom, Seong-min noticed how students looked at each other differently, some with new curiosity, others with hesitant kindness. And among them, new names surfaced, stories whispered, hands raised that once trembled. Vulnerability, once hidden behind sarcasm or silence, had become almost safe. One morning, as he organized essays on his desk, he heard a knock at the door. He looked up, and there she was. Ji-woo stood in the doorway, her uniform crisp, her eyes calm. Her presence silenced the classroom before he could say a word. Students turned, recognition dawning, but no one spoke. There was no applause, no murmuring, no questions, just stillness. She walked to the back of the room, her old seat, placed her bag beside the desk and sat down. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. She belonged there, as naturally as if she had never left. Seong-min, careful not to draw attention to her return, resumed the lesson. But his voice carried a deeper timbre now, one shaped by everything that had led to this moment. After class, the students left slowly, a few lingering glances exchanged, but no intrusion. When they were alone, Ji-woo approached his desk. She reached into her backpack and handed him a sealed envelope, light blue, folded with care. "Last one," she said. "You don't need to read it out loud." Then she turned and walked out. He waited until the end of the day. When the corridors emptied and dusk painted the room with a fading gold, he opened the letter. It read, "Dear Professor, this is not a confession, it's a memory. Not one I want to forget, but one I want to mark. Because even though it started in silence, it didn't end there. Thank you for listening to what I never said. Thank you for reading without judgment, for waiting without questions, for standing even when it cost you everything. You once said, 'Literature is how we survive the things we can't say in real life.' I think I understand that now. But I also learned that sometimes surviving isn't enough. Sometimes someone has to act. You did. You read in silence, but you acted out loud. And now I'm no longer afraid of being seen. Your student always, Ji-woo." He closed the letter with both hands, his breath unsteady. It was not praise, it was closure, the kind that did not erase what came before, but honored it. The following week, the school hosted a small ceremony to recognize initiatives in student welfare. It was not a celebration, but a reaffirmation. Teachers who had contributed to the transformation were acknowledged. A new support center was announced, named Sala da Esperanza, Hope Room, designed not as punishment or discipline, but refuge. At the end of the ceremony, Principal Hyejin's successor took the podium. Her voice was firm but open. "Institutions cannot feel," she said. "Only people can. This school failed not because it was bad, but because good people were told to be quiet. That ends now." The audience rose in a standing ovation, not for one individual, but for the moment itself. A collective release. A decision to remember. After the event, Ji-woo stood with Min-jun outside the auditorium. He was taller now, his eyes brighter. She held his hand with ease, no longer shielding him but walking beside him, a shared life, not a burden. Seong-min joined them. "Are you ready?" he asked. "For what?" she replied. "To write the next story, one that doesn't begin with silence." She smiled. "I think it already started." That afternoon, in their final literature class before spring break, he assigned the students one last prompt. Write a letter to someone who once saw you. He didn't say who it should be. He didn't ask them to share. When the bell rang, students left their papers folded on his desk. And as he began to read them one by one, he realized what had changed. Not the world entirely, not the system completely, but hearts, minds, eyes that no longer looked away. Among those letters, Ji-woo's remained. Her handwriting was unmistakable. Her words clear. "I don't sit in the back anymore because someone turned around." He looked out the window as cherry blossoms fluttered in the breeze, their petals catching light mid-air. Not a metaphor this time, just a season arriving. At last. And with it, the echo of a story that had started in the shadows but would never return to them.